So we're asked to graph some sine functions here, and we want to find out 4 pieces of information about this thing before we graph it. So we want to find out what the amplitude is, and we look right here to find amplitude. We want to find the period, and you look right here for period. And we want to find a phase shift, which is right there for phase shift. And then we want to find the vertical shift, which is right there for vertical shift. So I think that'll be the easiest one, so let's start there. The vertical shift is clearly 1 unit up from your x-axis. Okay, and we'll get to graphing it in a minute. The amplitude is pretty good. We take the absolute value of this number, so the absolute value of -6 is +6 as the amplitude. Okay, the negative tells us something about the way the graph looks, but for amplitude we always take the absolute value. Now the period comes from that green number, so let's see if the green will show up on here. Period equals 2 pi divided by that number in front of x. So in this case that is 1/2, and whenever we're dividing by a fraction, we end up multiplying by the reciprocal, which means this graph has a period of 4 pi. So it takes it 4 pi radians to make 1 complete revolution around the circle. So it's going really slowly. And then the phase shift. In order to do the phase shift, we have to get rid of these parentheses. So I need to distribute this 1/2. When I multiply 1/2 times pi over 2, 1/2 times pi over 2 becomes pi over 4 as the c value, or as your phase shift. Now because it's negative, that means we're going to be moving this right. Every point gets moved right, pi over 4 units. Okay, so let's look at what that looks like graphically speaking. So here's a nice axis. I'll use this axis. Let's put some tick marks on here. There's +1, there's +2. Actually, we probably need a lot more than that, don't we? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, because we have an amplitude of 6. Here's some negatives down there. So let's see, this is -5. And this is 1, 2, 3, 4, +5, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we have our vertical shift right through +1. So let's change colors back to red as your vertical shift. Let's see if I can do this. So here is your +1 vertical shift, 1 unit up from your x-axis. Let's see, that's pretty good. And then let's see, let's put our period in here. Our period is 4 pi. So somewhere out here, I'm going to put a little tick mark and label that tick mark 4 pi. Okay, which means half of that tick mark is 2 pi, which means half of that tick mark is regular pi, and then in here is 3 pi, and then we have a bunch of pi over 2's, and then half of those pi over 2's is pi over 4's, and so on and so forth. I understand you might not be able to see, but those are all, ooh, that's a pi. Let me tell you, that's pi. And this is 3 pi. It really looks distorted when you zoom in, doesn't it? There's another pi. Okay, so we have sine, and I think we have everything that we need to start with. Sine starts at the origin. So in this case, our origin is where the y-axis meets your midline. So there's where our y-axis meets our midline. Sine starts at 0. Sine ends at 0. So 4 pi is where it ends, 1 period. Sine ends at 0, and sine is 0 in the middle. Okay, that's true for every sine graph. Starts at 0, ends at 0, and is 0 in the middle. Okay? Now it's negative and it's 6. So rather than going up vertically 6 units, we're going to go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And in the middle of our zeros, we put, in this case, a minimum. So it has a minimum at pi, and it will have a maximum at 3 pi in between 2 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, way up here. 6 units above your midline and 6 units below your midline. Okay, now this would be the graph if it were just -6 sine of whatever, 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 whatever. Okay, now there's a bunch of blue dots on there you might not be able to see, but there are blue dots. Because we have one more thing to do, and that is to move each of these points right just pi over 4 units. Okay, so looking at my graph, if this much is pi and this is pi over 2, that means pi over 4 is half of one of my tick marks right there. So I'm going to move every one of my points just a little bit over to the right. So this 0 is now there. Our minimum down here at -5 is right there. Our next 0 is pi over 4 units from 2 pi. Okay, and then this next one up here, a little bit to the right, and then our ending one right here. There we go. Ends up right there. So this has got everything that you're going to need to ever do when we're graphing these trig functions. It has a vertical shift, it has a phase shift, it has a period change, and it happens to be negative. So those are all the things that we can do to a trig equation to get that as one complete period. Now, of course, it would go on and on and on and on and on. And on and on and on and on and on. Both ways. Go back what I did.